Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. This is Mike here at Weigert's Bonsai in Southwest Florida, bringing you another species overview. Today's species we're going to talk about is Ficus Microcarpa tiger bark, or Kinmen ficus. This is probably the preferred ficus to grow in the tropics for most artists, owing to the attractive bark that it develops, the reduced leaf size that it can exhibit, and also the extreme ramification that can be achieved with this species. Also, the care of this species is relatively easy when compared to other trees, so it is one that we tend to gravitate towards from beginning all the way to advanced levels in tropical bonsai. So today's video, I kind of want to just talk about the differences between a Kinmen or tiger bark ficus versus some of the other varieties of Microcarpa. Microcarpa is a vast family of ficus trees, basically called Chinese banyan, and they each exhibit a vast array of different foliage types, growth habits, bark, etc., etc. So as I said, the claim to fame with tiger bark is the attractive bark that it has, which you can see kind of takes on these striations on the bark that gives it its name. It's almost striped at certain parts. The other key attribute is the leaf size of this ficus. So this hasn't had any extreme horticultural practices other than just pruning maintenance. Eric, I don't think, has really been attempting to dwarf the leaf size on this specific tree yet. And so what you see is pretty much the maintained leaf size that you would get just from pruning the tree regularly and keeping the foliage in check. So it forms very, very dense, very easy, and the leaf size reduces just with consistent care. There are artists who do pursue ever smaller leaf sizes in other countries, and this is one of the species that can get very, very small leaves, very, very small internodes, and can be used from showman trees all the way up to very, very large trees. So just to show some of the differences, I also have some other Microcarpa to kind of show and illustrate some of these differences we just discussed. So as you can see, this is another Microcarpa. It's technically the same species as the tiger bark. They're just different cultivars or varieties. This is one that was collected, I believe, in Florida, and this is a native tree to Florida. We call it a Cuban Laurel, is the common name. And as you can note, it has a lot less of that striping or streaked pattern. You can see that. And then the consistent leaf size, if we compare the crowns together, you can see that this is a much larger consistent leaf and has a little bit more sparse ramification, not quite as dense. So Cuban Laurel can make amazing bonsai, can get just as dense, just as ramified. It just seems like it takes a little bit more work, a little bit more care to keep those leaves at a consistent size. So another variety that we have, I'll bring it from over here. This is another common one grown in Florida. This is a cultivar known as Melon Seed. And so you can see it does still have that trademark Microcarpa leaf, oblong with a slight pointed tip there. But it's also very much smaller. So this is probably the smallest cultivar that I've seen of Microcarpa, but it's not without some drawbacks. I still personally favor the tiger bark due to its robustness. I think it's a lot more hardy of a tree. It can take harder cuts, harder care, more neglect. I just think that it's a tougher tree. Also, the melon seed tends to always have a kind of chlorotic or yellowed out kind of look, whereas you can see that the tiger bark is almost uniformly green throughout. So care is very, very easy on the tiger bark. Melon seed can be a little more touchy. Definitely tougher than other species that are outside of the ficus range. You can see they do grow very, very dense, however, and so melon seed make great ficus bonsai in and of their own right. I just merely have a preference for this species. Also, you can see that on the melon seed it does take on those tiger bark-like striations. I do believe that this was drawn from the tiger bark cultivar and is a subcultivar of that, but that's all just kind of speculation. So just going over a few other things that we have here at the nursery and the way that we grow these trees here. We grow them from cuttings. We also import these trees from China, and so they'll take on very different trunk characteristics and might change the way that you would use these trees. So this is kind of our typical $25 imported Ficus tiger bark. And so you can see early on in the tree's life in China, it's wired with steel wire and growing out to some degree to really set that motion. And then it's sent over here to continue its growth as a pre-bonsai. So these come in by the hundreds, all wired in that same kind of S-shaped movement. So once we get a little further into the video, I'll come back to this and we'll talk about how you would use this material, okay? Bringing in another guy, this is another one that we grow here domestically. You can see that the trunk is left straight. We do not wire these as young trees like they do in China, just keeping them straight, and then we'll also show how to work on this kind of material and the differences that you might take in the approach of each of the different ones. So you might do a little something different with this guy as opposed to the techniques you might employ on that guy, okay? And then, just ever moving on, we have a lot of trees here. So this is also an import here. This is an import that was not wired out. These come in fairly robust sizes. Each one looks fairly similar, but they do have some very unique character branches on them. This one happens to have a very nice low branch here with lots of potential ramification. Now, as with all ficus bonsai, they do give off aerial roots, which, depending on who you ask and what artist you're subscribing to, different aesthetics call for either the use or removal of aerial roots. Some artists like to convey true banyan styles, with the aerial roots kind of conveying what we all know of as a banyan. But some of the more Japanese or more technical approaches have kind of gotten away from using aerial roots, because with each aerial root, you'll notice you get a corresponding area of reverse taper. So if you can look in here, this branch is actually getting fatter where this aerial root connects, and so you'll get kind of like a Popeye arm, where it's fatter here and skinnier behind that. I don't know if that helps you see it if I turn it. So those aerial roots, wherever they kind of connect to a branch, they will start to feed that area excessively. The branch will start to take more nutrients from the aerial root than it will from the actual trunk, and you'll start to get reverse taper. So people have argued that that is how ficus grow. They grow with aerial roots, and if you want to convey a banyan, you have to deal with some degree of reverse taper. Other artists have decided to use the ficus in other ways to show other characteristics of ficus, such as nabari, great nabari, no aerial roots, and focusing on the typical Japanese approach of great branch structure, ramification, nabari, and trunk line. So we'll show a few more of those too as we get more into the video. I'll go over a few different examples of some style trees and how that can be used. All right, so this is one of our domestic grown large tiger bark ficus. So these have been grown in the nursery in pots for several years. And this one is at the $350 mark. So they're a little cheaper if they're domestically grown. You do lack kind of the sizable branches that some of the imports have, but the trunks are very similar, and the character of the nabari is very similar. This one is also dropping aerial roots readily and also giving us that corresponding reverse taper that may or may not be a problem. So we do have other sizes available for sale, so feel free to come out and check out what we do have available if you are interested in growing one of these. I'll go forth in the rest of the video. We'll talk about ways you can use this material, and hopefully that'll help you guys feel a little more comfortable, and hopefully you guys will develop a passion similar to mine for this species and start growing in excess. So these are just some project trees that I'm working on at my house. All of them are tiger bark ficus, and I'll talk to you about each one and kind of the steps that I've gone through to get them where they are. So the first one, again, Shohin tiger bark. For those of you who follow me on social media, you know that I'm very big into Shohin trees, small chunky trees, and that's where I developed most of my skills in bonsai. That's where my passion has pretty much lied for the last 11 years. So a lot of my collection is Shohin trees. This is one that I air layered off of a larger tree that I'll show you guys in a second. This was air layered about a year and a half ago. And the reason I air layered it was it had a lot of great branching on it that could have made for a smaller tree, as well as a nice trunk line with no giant scars on the trunk that I would have to heal going forward. So my biggest scar is probably here, like a little belly button, and knowing this species, it heals very readily. I think in one more season, I'll be able to close that wound no problem and move forward with the design. So that's one of the reasons why I chose to go forward and air layer this, take the time to do that, was I did see a quality tree here, and on the parent tree where it was growing, just beneath this branch section, it had actually developed reverse taper from too many branches growing in one place at the time. So what I did was I actually accomplished 2 goals. I killed 2 birds with 1 stone. I eliminated the reverse taper on the parent tree, which I'll show you that tree here in a minute. And I also developed a second tree as a high quality show hen. So I used the reverse taper kind of to my benefit to grow a nice base here at the bottom. So that's a very easy technique. Air layering is not difficult. It just took me a little bit of extra time to kind of prep the tree for removal. But that didn't cost me any extra money aside from the cost of the parent tree. And this one was kind of a free bonus. So that was one way to use this material. It's kind of messy right now. Some of these branches are just being allowed to grow freely. My thought process is to thicken the structure of the tree first, get the branches fat, and then cut them back for division and increase the ramification at a later date. So right now I'm not pruning it other than to balance the vigor. If one side gets too strong, I might prune some leaves off to kind of push the vigor to weaker sides. But other than that, it's largely just freely growing until I'm ready to take the next step. Okay, so that's one way to use the material. Another project tree that I've been working on, this guy's about a year, maybe a year and a couple months old, but this started out as 5 $5 cuttings that I bought from Eric. They were rooted cuttings, and I decided to do a fusion project with them. So all of the typical ficus techniques that they're famous for, grafting, fusing, rooting, air layering, all of those techniques are available on tiger bark ficus. They tend to do it at a quicker rate than some of the others, again owing to its just hardy nature and its quick growing growth habit. So this is only about a year and 2 months old maybe. And you can see that these $5 cuttings, they started maybe this size a year ago. And all I did was group them together, cover them with tape and maybe a little bit of wire to bind them. And they fused pretty good. There's still some areas where they haven't fully connected, but what I'll probably do this year is re-tape them tighter, bring it a little tighter, and go one more section of growth to kind of really lock that fusion in. Some of the benefits of fusing these trees is you can get a much larger tree quicker, and not only that, you'll see this in Southeast Asian countries, is you kind of get a different kind of root base from fusing these trees together. So each part of my trunk eventually will kind of have a fluted section of roots that will kind of appear as a muscled section to the trunk. So it'll give a little bit of a different aesthetic as well to the tree as it matures and as it grows. I will continue to add small cuttings and seedlings in here to continue to bulk it out and to continue to fuse different fluting to it if I can. And so I'll continue that probably this year as well, just adding more and more cuttings to it to beef it out. So that's another way that you can use this. You can see I haven't been maintaining this. If I prune this, that's only going to slow down the fusion process. So I've just been letting it run. I did wire some shape into some of the branches and kind of originally laid them horizontal. But other than that, I'm fully intending to cut this tree back, somewhere in here eventually, and really take this back to the trunk line when I'm ready to do that. So I'm not too worried about where the growth is going right now. Okay, so one more way to kind of use this material. All right, this is another show hen. This one that I grew a little differently. This was rooted as a cutting many years ago and was essentially stuck in a mame pot as a very small cutting. I had wired it out into semi-cascade. It had 1 or 2 branches on it, and so this tree has been growing in pot culture its entire life. So it's been up potted 2 times. This is the second time it was up potted, so it's finally achieved show-hin size, and the tree has probably been in training for about 6 years. I'm eventually going to repot it and cascade it a little more and try to free up this area that's touching on the pot. That's typically a bad taste to have your cascade tree touching the rim of the pot. So I will fix that on the next potting. Also, I'll go through and rewire some of the growth that has grown since the last styling, but right now I'm just trying to keep the leaf size consistent, keep on dividing the branches if I can, and increase the ramification while kind of dwarfing that leaf size if I can. So this one I kind of took a different approach with. I wasn't in a rush to grow big branches, just did slow pot culture, and I'm pretty happy with the results. There will always be drawbacks to choosing one path or the other, but this has been a charming tree for the entirety of its life, and so I'm pretty happy with the way it's turned out with the path that we chose with this tree. Okay, and finally, so this is the parent tree that this guy was taken off of. Okay, so see if you guys can get both of those in the shot. So this guy is actually a cutting, or sorry, an air layer from this guy. And one of the reasons that I ended up with a lot of these cool air layers is, as I mentioned earlier, is a lot of these trees, when they're imported, they sit in the nursery sometimes for years, and they're pruned for maintenance to keep the branches tight. And while that helps to increase the amount of options we have available when we do decide to style our tree, it can, over long periods of time, start to create areas that need to be removed as they start to get too fat in the design. So this tree had been out in the nursery for a very long time and did have some areas of reverse taper. And like I said, I utilized all of those to my advantage, and I think I got about 3 nice retusa out of it, and I've given away 2 of them and kept 1 for myself. So I got 3 really nice show-hin and corrected a problem on my main tree that I purchased. So this tree has, it's taking on a kind of different aesthetic. I was inspired by artists in Taiwan and some of the Penjing I have seen and some of their aesthetic principles. So I've been kind of training this a little differently. And I've also been pursuing this in the way that they pursue ficus design in Taiwan as well. You can see down at the base, I have these ugly little whips that you can see, these little rooted cuttings. These are also tiger bark ficus that Eric has rooted in the past year, and I'm using them to create root grafts. So a root graft is just like an approach graft. I basically cut the cambium layer on the trunk at soil level. I take a small cutting, I insert it into the channel, and then I use thumbtacks and cut paste to hold it tightly to the trunk while that grows. So as this grows and gets healthier and fatter, it will fuse to the trunk just like we saw in our fusion project. And then I will go ahead and cut it here, and I will have the roots now feeding this tree. So that will help me build a better nabari and help me correct kind of what's called a one-sided nabari. I'll be able to build roots out in a radial pattern. And I'll also be able to just create a more radial nabari consistent with kind of Japanese or Taiwanese design. You can see I've eliminated all aerial roots on my designs. I don't typically grow aerial roots, again, because I want to mitigate that reverse taper. But I've also sacrificed growing true banyan design for that. So just keep that in mind. If you guys want a banyan, you have to deal with the aerial roots and the reverse taper that come with that. So I'm hoping in time these root grafts will fuse to this, and I'll continue to add more and more throughout the year. I'll probably give this was just repotted a month ago, so I'll probably give this another 6 months or so, and I might pull it out of the pot and add another round of root grafts to continue to build out that nabari. I will also be doing other grafts, approach grafts, on the tree in areas where it maybe has been difficult to get branches, and that's something that this species is very, very easy to do with. Approach grafts, it handles very, very easily. And if you're confident in your grafting skill, you can even go further and do cleft grafts, veneer grafts, peg grafts, and other types of more advanced grafts. But for those of us who are first starting using grafting, this is the perfect species to do it to. Start with thread grafts and approach grafts, and I think you'll be shocked at the success that you'll have. So ficus tiger bark is, in my opinion, the premier ficus to use, as I've been saying. It has a lot of versatility to it in the way that you can use it, and so I've been very, very happy with this species in the 10 years I've been working with it. Okay, so before we wrap up the video, I want to go back to some of these trees that we had, the $25 trees, and just show really quickly how I would probably work these. Let me just grab one tool. So again, I'm big into show hen. That's kind of where I cut my teeth. So I'm probably going to be looking at both of these trees to be smaller trees. The way that I was always taught was you look for the area on the tree where it starts to lack interest, be it movement or taper, and that is where you make your cut. So let's kind of explore that principle on this tree. And you'll see that this tree, starting from the base, has nice movement, has nice taper as well. And now in here, we're starting to lose taper, but we still have movement. So that saves me. I don't have to cut it yet because I still have interest. So once I lack interest, I get to maybe this section in here where we're no longer really moving and our taper is starting to disappear. I might decide that this is the area to cut here and continue my trunk with taper going into this branch. So let's kind of try that out and see how that works. So I'm going to first get rid of that. Now, when I use a concave like this on a big kind of chunky knob like that, I want to make sure that I do it in sections, and I want to make sure I don't get too close to where I want the final cut to be yet. So you can see my concave is pretty far away right now. Okay. So I got it to a more manageable piece. Now I can kind of get in there and be a little more accurate with my cut. Now when using a concave cutter, always keep in mind that it is a concave blade. And so wherever you lay the blade on the tree, that's not going to be where your wound finishes. Your wound is going to dig in a little deeper than you expect it to. And so always kind of keep that in mind when you're making a concave cut. Now you do want to make the cut as clean as possible, so I might even switch tools and get a knob cutter just to make sure. And if you can, you do want to kind of concave that cut a little bit. So you see how it's kind of indented inward. So that'll allow that wound to fill with scar tissue and hopefully will end up somewhere flush. Okay, instead of having a buildup of scar tissue. So now I'll apply a little bit of cut paste. It doesn't matter if you use the orange stuff or if you use the putty that's really popular, as long as you seal that wound and keep both external moisture from getting in there and internal moisture from getting out. You can see, just like that. So that's probably a little heavy on the wire. Okay, so now I'm just going to wire a few of these branches. There's only 3 on here. And I know it looks kind of aggressive, and I know it's drastic to do this to the tree, but you don't need to start with 1,000,000 branches to make a successful bonsai. And honestly, you don't want to build on problems going forward, because as your eye develops, once you do decide to fix the problem, all the years work you've put into it in the time it took your eye to develop, you now have to cut off to fix the issue. So being aggressive and removing the flaws early on is definitely more advisable than kind of waiting and seeing how you feel about it. You know, if you're confident that it lacks taper, it lacks interest, that's not going to easily go away just by growing the tree out. So when I'm wiring, if I want to bring a branch down like that, I want to make sure I come over the shoulder And likewise, if I want to bring the branch up, I want to make sure to come up under the armpit. Okay. So one more little piece of wire. Double on this one just so I have a place to anchor to. So I'm not doubling on this one because I need it for the strength or anything like that. I just need a spot to kind of anchor onto safely so I can get to this branch. Trick with moving a branch that you've just wired is, especially if you're going to be putting any kind of twist into it or movement, is I want to twist the wire in the direction that I bent it over the branch. So you see this one is bent in a counterclockwise way. So if you look at it, it's going this way. And so when I twist it, I need to twist it in the same direction. Otherwise I'm loosening the wire and not tightening it. So I'll show you what I mean by that. And now I am going to put kind of extreme movement into this particular tree only because the trunk also has that kind of exaggerated movement. And I'm of the theory that whatever environment shapes your trunk needs also shape your branches. So I'm going to try to mirror everything that they did in China. See, I'm actually kind of looping these branches and twisting them. And I might go back, I'm going to fix that here in a minute, make that look a little more interesting. So now that's kind of the first step here. And now I don't have to technically do anything else. If I wanted this branch to thicken, I would let this branch run out until it gets to the size I want. Likewise with this guy, and likewise with the top. Now, if I didn't want to thicken this branch and I just wanted to move on to refinement and start dividing this branch, then I would cut here, I would cut here, and I would probably shorten these guys back to about like that. And I would wait for the next flush of branches, and then I would style the next phase of the tree. Okay, so that's another way of doing it. So I personally, even if I wasn't going to run this branch and this branch, I might still run the top, hence why I didn't cut it back completely, just to kind of heal that wound we created. All right, so that's one way to use the material. Now this is a straighter trunk. This one doesn't have much movement to it, and so we need to kind of create a different set of rules, and we're looking for kind of a different structure. We are going to be mostly utilizing the ramification and the structure of the trunk as it ages to kind of show character on this tree, and it won't be as easy to make it interesting day one. The same rule still applies though. I mentioned that we cut where the tree lacks taper or interest. Taper or movement, essentially. So we don't have any movement to the tree, so where we cut is going to be 100% based on taper. So if we start at the base of this tree, we're about an inch wide here, maybe an inch and a half, and we're slowly getting a little smaller. We're probably about 3/4 of an inch here, 3/4 of an inch, and right about here in this section above my hand, you'll see that this section loses all taper. So we no longer are getting thinner, we're consistently the same size, and especially based off the ratio of taper that we started with, our trunk needs to be cut at least right around here, okay? And then we'll bring in another top to finish off the taper ratio and make sure that we have a consistent declining taper ratio moving up the trunk, okay? So the first thing I would do is make my cut. Now the good news is all these things that I'm cutting off can all be used to root as other cuttings. You can root them as either large cuttings like this, just defoliate it and stick it in potting soil, water it and put it in the shade, or you can break it down to its individual parts and get more, but they won't be as sizable. Same thing, defoliate them, put them in potting soil, and keep them in the shade. Don't overwater them. So that is an added benefit to being aggressive and cutting some of this off, as you can kind of increase the amount of trees you have. Get my fat hand out of the way. So now I'm going to try and find the best branch to be a top, and I think I've located it. Cool. So when I'm finding the front, I usually want to try to mix the side that's going to have the best nabari. All right. The best nabari plus the most efficient use of the branches. So if I choose this as the front, I have to cut off a lot of very useful branches because they'll now be coming at the front of the viewer. But if I use this as the front, I'm only losing a few small branches, and I get to keep most of what I have to structure for our tree. Okay, right, so now I've established which branch I'm going to use for the top. This small branch here will be the new apex. So before I move forward, I'm just going to paste this large wound at the top. And I'll probably recut this wound later, depending on how it's starting to heal, to adjust the callus if I need to. If it's not rolling over correctly, I might recut it at that point. But you do want to try to get it as close to perfect as you can on the first cut. It'll just save you some time. So now I'm lined up to use this as my front. The next thing I do is select the branches that I'm going to be able to keep in the design. Kind of going back to your basic rules of you don't want any bar branches. You want to create a left, right, and back kind of orientation to the branches, or it could be right, left, back. It doesn't have to follow the left, right, back. But you do want to create a three-dimensional structure. So that's why you do need branches going to each side and also to the rear of the design. So I'm going to be going through selecting which ones I'm going to keep and which ones to remove real quick. Maybe so far I'll keep him. So we have some bar branches. So I'll mitigate those first by taking these away, this small cluster of branches, because they are growing right across from this section here. So let me just make sure I'm not cutting off the wrong branch. Okay, good. Okay, so now I'll also remove this guy, and that should show up. Start of a good branch structure. So now you see this one doesn't have one on the other side. This one moving up doesn't have one on the other side, and this one doesn't have one on the other side. As well as our back branch kind of has a little space where there's nothing right across from him as well. So that's a good start to our branches. We're not going to run into any reverse taper problems with that going forward. So now I'll move up to the top ring of the design, where again we've got to do the same kind of picking through the branches. So I'm going to turn it and look at it. And the branches actually seem pretty well aligned, so I'll probably only remove a few. Okay. All right, so again, the top now, we don't have any bar branches here. Everything's given a little bit of leeway. I like to at least have one internode of separation between branches, and ideally, me personally, I try to only have two branches coming out from any one point. So now I'm going to wire what I have left really quick. Shouldn't take too long. These are smaller branches, but even being so small, I'd probably still wire with 2.0. I just think it holds the best. It's a little long there, but that's okay. So this small one at the base doesn't seem very important now, and he is smaller than some of the other branches that are above him, but branches can grow and branches can get thicker, and I caution you guys to don't always cut off branches to make your tree look the best for that specific day, because sometimes that can hurt you going down the road if it's a branch that's in a really good location and just needs to be kind of bulked up a little bit. Don't just cut it off because it doesn't look good for that day. So ideally when I'm wiring, I try to wire at least 2 loops of wire away from my next branch. Basically, I don't want to wire too close to the branch that I'm starting with, or else I'll get like a teeter-totter type effect and the branch won't anchor correctly. So I do need to put a little bit of space between the branches I'm wiring, and I can't wire the branch right across from this guy necessarily. So you see I'm always wiring pairs of branches, one branch to another branch. It's about efficiency and aesthetics as well, trying to keep everything neat and orderly, as well as efficient. Loops. Wire all the way out because I don't know if I'm going to prune any of these yet. I don't know the final length that these are going to be yet. So I'm just wiring them out, and then I'll prune them in accordingly once I finish with the design. So now I'll probably start using a little bit smaller wire. And I haven't positioned my branches yet. I'm just getting them wired. Once I get everything wired, I'll go through and position and prune things if they need to be. But right now, I'm just applying the wire. You can also defoliate the tree if you wanted to at this stage, which could make it a little easier to get the wire on if you're not comfortable wiring with leaves. You also notice I'm using my scissor to cut wire, which is usually considered a big no-no, but me personally, I do purchase these scissors with the intent of kind of having an everything tool. It's something that, you know, Eric does in the nursery. He keeps a red-handled pair of shears on him, and it's something that has always been kind of ingrained into me to always keep a utilitarian tool, something that can be your every tool. So while I do have wire cutters, and for heavier wire I will use them, those of you who have been to my classes are definitely used to seeing me kind of use my scissors for everything. I don't use these same scissors for, you know, fine cuts or detail pruning or anything like that, but for rough work and poking around in soil, cutting wire, things like that, they work pretty good. Okay, we're running out of space. So now here's a point where once you start running out of space, this can start to be helpful, is when you start to wire into other branches that are near you. So you see this branch has already been wired, and so I'm going to use that as my anchor, get about 2 to 3 loops of wire on it, and then come to his little buddy. I'll wire that on as well. We have 2 more branches to wire. So again, I'm going to wrap my 2 loops of wire to my already wired branch to anchor. One more branch now. One more tiny branch here to wire. tied in first. Okay, so now you see every branch is wired on the design. Now I can go ahead and start placing them. So I'm not looking to put really crazy movement into the design because the trunk doesn't have really crazy movement. It's a straighter trunk, so I want my branches to just have very gentle movement. Some artists might even keep the branches completely straight and just acquire movement by pruning. So you'll get kind of angle changes every time you prune. For me, I'm just going to put a slight undulation into the branch, just so it's not so monotonous. And now I like to bring the branches horizontal, mostly, especially the lower ones. That allows light into the back of the branch and allows it to bud back further into the tree's design. So I'm laying most of these horizontal. I'm also trying to keep them from laying right on top of one another. So I want to make sure that each branch can get sunlight to some degree. So some of these low branches I'm probably going to keep long to run to get a little thicker. And some of these top branches I'll just let thicken naturally with the ramification. Okay, so that's the start. There, nothing too impressive, just getting our branches down. Even this low guy, who's still shorter, he might end up being something good for us going down the road, might end up adding a little bit of character low down on the trunk. So that might be a branch that we want to keep. You can always remove it at a later date. It's not going to be a big deal. So it's one of those things that's so early in the design, we'll just leave what we have and see kind of how it develops. And if we start noticing any problems or any aesthetic issues we don't like, we can remove that lower branch. So that's pretty much it for utilizing our Ficus Microcarpa material. Now there is a lot we can do with tiger bark that we didn't go over in the video, so it's a very vast world of horticulture out there. So I do encourage you guys to read as much as you can about them and to give it a shot. You know, grab a couple of these if you can, and I think you'll be rewarded. It is a tree that I definitely recommend for beginners. If you're brand new to bonsai and you're looking for something that will be a tree that challenges you from the beginning, well, not challenges you, but rather encourages you from the beginning all the way to your advanced phases, then the tiger bark is the perfect tree. It's a tree that works well for beginners as well as those who've been in the hobby for a long period of time. So get out there, get your tiger bark ficus, and enjoy. Hope you guys stay safe out there. And again, this was Mike with Weigerts. Thanks for tuning in today.